introduction. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Esther, for presenting me, and thank you for inviting me to participate. So I am in charge of research at IRD, and I specialize in nutritional epidemiology. And I am really interested in food systems and how production systems can enhance quality of food. Everything which is being presented to you today leads up to what I'm going to show in all modesty. I'm going to talk about the end of that path once you've produced your food, and that is the nutritional state of the different individuals. And in terms of mass catering, I'm going to talk about school meals. And I'm addressing the question of school meals in nutrition. So I'm going to kick off with a couple of definitions just to define what food security actually is and what nutrition is and how they are tied in together. So we've got a first definition here is food security. It exists because all human beings have access to sufficient food, which is healthy, nutritious, and it enables them to satisfy their energy needs and their taste to be healthy and active. So that is a condition, a definition which was coined in 1996 at the World Food Summit. Everyone agreed about that. And it was updated in 2009 to include the social aspect in terms of access to food. The interesting thing here with this definition is that it places the accent on conditional aspects of food safety. First of all, food has to be available in a zone, and then the food that is available needs to be accessible in terms of economy and physically accessible, and then it has to be used by the population. So the availability and use all play a role in this security. And in this notion, we have a definition of another type of security, and that is nutritional security. When we're talking about nutrition, are we talking about the different vitamins, etc., and are there enough of them, or are we talking about a different aspect of nutrition, which is not only your enough daily intake, but it's more the state of health? In 2012, another definition was coined to combine nutrition and food safety, so that all human beings have access to healthy food in sufficient qualities of a good quality to provide enough energy. So that's the first part, talking about the nutrients. And the second part is the positive effects are reinforced by an environment in which sewerage, healthcare, and the environment is sufficient. So you've got enough nutrition, and you've also got the whole healthcare system, which it ties in with that food system. And as you can see, in terms of this definition, there are several terms, and if one of these terms is missing, that will create food insecurity. And there are several possibilities, several ways of defining insecurity. It could be in matters of availability, accessibility, use. But one of the definitions that is most frequently used and is used and measured around the world and used in the Sustainable Development Goals is the FIES definition, which focuses on the notion of access to food, mainly for those people who don't have enough money or those people who are lacking some other resource, i.e. if they grow their own food. This indicator is based on 8 questions which describe a whole series of food insecurity experiences, which are in different degrees of seriousness, and they are from serious to not so serious. And the idea of moderate food insecurity pertains to individuals who have reduced the number, or the amount, or the quantity of their nutrients and aren't sure that they're going to be able to get hold of enough of those foodstuffs. And if anyone is in food insecurity, it means that they have exhausted all of their resources and they can remain 1 or more days without actually eating. And when you take a look at that definition, you can see different levels around the world. There are 2 billion people around the world who are in moderate or serious food insecurity, and there are variations from one region to the next between Africa and Asia, for example, North America and Europe. In Africa, over half of the population in Africa is in a state of serious or moderate food insecurity. We can also see that food insecurity is all over the place, even in the richer countries. There are 89 million people in North America and in Europe. And coming down to the scale of France, it's estimated there are about 4 million people in moderate or serious food insecurity in between 2014 and 2018, and that was in France. Another aspect is malnutrition. Malnutrition is a physiological condition that is abnormal, and it is caused by an insufficient, unbalanced or excessive consumption of macro or micronutrients. And malnutrition translates into 3 types of problem. The first is malnutrition. You can not have enough energy, not have enough protein, and that slows down growth. Or you can be lacking in nutrients, and that can generate either an illness or a negative metabolic state. Or you can also be overweight or suffer from obesity, or this can concern illnesses such as heart problems and even cancer. There are these 3 major problems, therefore. They coexist on different scales in one and the same country or in a community or in a household. There will be different components of these 3 components of malnutrition. So here we can come up with some figures which makes your head spin rather rapidly. Malnutrition concerns millions of children around the world. 155 million are not growing as fast as they should be, and there are many other aspects. They are lacking micronutrients. There are over 1 billion children and women who are anemic because they don't have enough iron. There are 500,000 children who become blind every year because they don't have enough vitamin A. We've got 2 million individuals who don't have enough iodine. There are lots of lacks which are noted. There is people are overweight. 2 billion people are overweight. Billion people who have too high blood pressure, more have diabetes. There are 41 million children who are overweight. And if you take a look at France now, there are problems here. There are some nutrients which are lacking. According to the latest study, 17% of children between 6 and 17 are overweight, and 50% of adults are overweight. And INSERM says that 1 in 3 adults has high blood pressure. Now let's take a look at the different aspects of malnutrition and insecurity. So there's you can be either underweight or overweight, and that can be traced back to diet. And it's linked to food insecurity in a child's household, for example, or the inability to get hold of a certain type of food. In yellow and orange, you have the explanations for slowed down growth, mainly not enough calories being consumed, not enough nutrients being consumed. And in terms of people who are overweight, that's easy access to certain foodstuffs which are very high in calorie but which don't contain very many nutrients. There are other factors, of course, which come into play. The state of an individual is reflected in this, and we also see other aspects which could include whether or not people play sport or not. And let's not forget that there's a whole range of fundamental determinants which will explain these links. They are environmental, cultural, economic factors of the person's lifestyle. Let's take a look at mass catering, and in particular school meals. We can see that school meals can bring some of these elements, some of these foodstuffs to children, making up for the vitamins and the minerals which they don't have at home, or it could also enable them to have healthier foods and expose them less to high-calorie, low nutritional foods. And if school meals are inexpensive or even free, that can have an impact on the household's food insecurity, because it just makes life easier for them. And so what I suggest is taking a look at different examples of literature from around the world about how school meals impact food insecurity. So, there are many advantages recognized in school meals, but the offering in school canteens varies from one school to the next. For example, you can have a context where there's a complete meal which is provided, as is the case in France and Brazil, or it can be simply a means of providing premises where the students can go and eat their own picnic which they brought from home. That's the case in the States, often in the UK as well. Or you can have a combination of the two. You can either buy your school meal or bring your own meal in with you. Or there is also the sale of pre-packed meals on sale at school, which is the case for Ireland, for example. There are other situations in countries with low revenue, and there's not a school meal which is automatically provided, but there are certain international programs which will then step in and offer meals in areas where the population is vulnerable. If we take a look at the different advantages of school meals, first of all, there's social protection. We've already mentioned that this morning. It really is a relief for the household. There's also a lot of education involved, because if you take a low revenue country, a school meal enhances the number of school days. It encourages children to come to school to have a proper meal. And thirdly, good school meals enhances the students' concentration, so they can learn better. And also there's the nutritional aspect, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about. I'm just brushing across it here. There's some studies which have been shown to analyse the relationship between school meals and obesity. I'm going to talk about the quality of the meals which are offered. So we're going to start with a case from England. This was a survey carried out in 2007 in schools in England, and they compared the nutritional contribution of the meal among 2,000 children aged between 6 and 8, and compared those children who ate the meals handed out by the school with those children who brought their own meals. And you can see on the table here, on the left-hand side, we've got the school meals which were handed out, and in the middle, they're packed lunches which they brought, and on the far right, you have the difference which is calculated, taking into account a host of socio-demographic characteristics. So there is some improvement in terms of protein, fibre, zinc, folate among the children who had school meals as opposed to the packed lunches. And they had less sugar, and they also had less sodium in their meal. So it was a better profile in the school meal. We have the same example from Brazil. In this case, it was in a town called Belo Horizonte, and there was a survey carried out in 2013 and another one in 2015. We had 1,360 children aged between 8 and 12, and they looked at how frequently they went to the school canteen, and they also looked at the social vulnerability of where they lived. And when the researchers compared the nutrients and the calories, you can see on the right-hand side that the children who went to the school canteen and came from a vulnerable background, well, they had more fruit, they had more vegetables, they were fresh fruit and veg, and they eat fewer processed foods, fewer sugary drinks than those who were not having the school meals. It's also interesting to note that if we see these profiles of the children who go to school meals when they live in very risky, vulnerable areas, their results are pretty similar to those who are not in those risky geographical zones. And in this survey, the researchers had a look at the nutritional contribution, and we see that there's a better profile for those children who had the school meals. This survey comes from Norway. It's interesting because it contradicts what I've just said to you, really. It's a survey of teenagers. They were teenagers is a big word really. They were aged between 12 and 13. So the researchers had a look at a population that lived in the east of Norway and analysed what the eating behaviour was depending on how often they went to the school canteen. And what they noted was that the school canteen is not used at all. 2/3 of the children don't ever go to the school canteen, and they saw that those who ate at the canteen because they bring their own packed lunch, those who would go most frequently to the school canteen would tend more frequently to eat salty, sweet snacks and sugary drinks. And they also saw that this same population, so these are children who regularly would go to the school canteen building with their own packed lunch, they would often tend more frequently to purchase snacks and drinks during the lunch break, and going to school or home from school, they would call off at the shops, the local shops. This survey was followed by a series of interviews to ask the children about the links between going to the school canteen and this rather impoverished behaviour. In order to go to the school canteen, the children would come with money every day to pay for the meal that they were going to have, so that they had access to money, therefore, and they could use that money. Instead of buying a school meal, they could use it to buy anything from the shops. They could buy products which were more attractive in their eyes than what was available at the school. So it means that you can have a better offering in terms of quality at the school canteen, but depending on how that food is accessed, depending on the environment, the benefits, the advantages will just go up in smoke, really. So that brings us on to the question of the food environment. A food environment can be defined as an interface between those actors who produce elements in the food system. They produce the food, they store it, they process it and distribute it, and consumers, on the other hand. It's a zone, a theoretical zone, where food is acquired and consumed by individuals. So you have this sketch here, which was designed by Turner in 2019, where you can see the structural side and the individual side of the food environment. As far as the structure is concerned, we have what is available, what products are available in a given environment, what is the cost of each item, how do the retailers sell them. And there is all kinds of aspects pertaining to marketing, special offers, advertising, and different rules and regulations for these products. And on the other hand, you have the individual side of these elements with how physically accessible these items are. How do the people go around? Do they have transport to get to these outlets? Financially, how accessible are they? Do they have money in order to buy these things? There are aspects about habits and lifestyle, and there's also the desirability aspect, which is tied in with culture. What kind of image do we have of all of the different food stuffs? So this shows us that there is food, there's the school food, but school canteens are competing with a whole array of other types of shops and automatic distributors in the school, distributing machines in the schools. And so it's important to take into consideration much more than simply the school canteen when you're talking about the environment. And there has been a lot of work carried out to try and identify what the impact is of a food environment in terms of school canteens. So work was carried out to review and analyse the data in 2018 on different impact studies of policies pertaining to food environments and school, to identify what the students' habits were. Here we're looking at a study that is mainly based on American data, but with a little bit of data from England and Norway thrown in there as well. You can't really compare it to France. So if you take a look at the different food policies that were deployed in schools pertaining to the direct distribution of fruit and vegetables, i.e. giving them out free or at a very low cost, it was noted that one third of a portion per day of fruit or veg was the consumption rate. And that's if they were given out free, and there was very little impact on their weight or their metabolism. If you take a look now at the regulations, policies that aim to reduce access to food that is not recommended for your health, i.e. Sugary drinks, deploying this policy brought down consumption by 1/5 of a sweet portion per day, and we've got all kinds of surveys to confirm this. And there was also a reduction of 1/10 of a portion of sodas, sweet drinks being consumed every day. There was not necessarily any impact on body weight or metabolism, but that was perhaps more pertaining to the design of the study and how long the individuals were being observed, because you have to spend a longer time analysing body weight and metabolic evolutions. So more research really needs to be carried out. And let's take a look and see France. Take a look at France. We have some data, but not that much really. There's a first set of data here, which is provided by different surveys carried out in France in 2006 and 2007. So there were two parallel surveys which come out with similar events. And so that enabled us to compare the make-up of lunches taken at the school canteen and lunches that were taken at home. These were children, teenagers who went to different schools, different school levels, infant, junior and senior school. The children were aged up to 17 years old. It was noted that attending school canteen, no matter what age the child was, made sure that they ate more bread, more fish, more dairy, more fruit, whether it's fresh fruit or processed fruit. more, therefore, than at home. Less sugary drinks, less burgers, etc. And if we look more in detail at the smallest children, they would more regularly eat vegetables and soups, and the middle school and high school children would have less pizza. There were a few negative impacts as well, and that was the fact of eating more sugary biscuits and pastries and a little bit more pizza and ice cream amongst the older children. But all in all, we are talking about consumption which is more favourable at school rather than at home, depending according to the different guidelines. It's also important to note that these improvements were all the more striking when there was a better school kitchen, and it's bigger improvements for the younger children than for the older children.
But those were older data because we must take into account a change that has occurred within French regulation, because since the 30th of September 2011, Decree number 2011-1227 regulates the composition of meals served in school canteens. And it regulates this according to nutritional criteria that regulate the frequency at which 15 types of different foods are served. So we're talking about fruit, dairy produce, meat, fish, according to their fat and protein content. So how often these foods must be served. And therefore, a series of 20 meals was analysed within 20 different organisations that supply primary schools. So the interest here is that there was a variety of organisations that were investigated according to their geographical situation, locations, the number of meals served, and whether it was in a central kitchen or cooked on site. And the results revealed heterogeneousness in the respect of the frequency at which these foods were served. So there were series where only 4 criteria out of the 15 were complied with. So there was an average of 9 criteria that were respected. So once we say, well, actually, not all of the criteria are complied with, what does this mean in terms of quality? Well, in fact, on average, what we can note is that these meals brought about 700 kilocalories to the children. So take advantage of this musical interlude for a quick sip of water. And back again. So the 700 kilocalories represent 1/3 of the energy content that these children should consume. So these were very balanced in terms of macronutrients, be it protein, fats, or starches. They also respected recommendations with regard to carbohydrates and saturated fatty acids. So then there were analyses using the ratio, the average adequation ratio, which looks at the vitamin and mineral contents. And what we can see is that these meals that only contribute 1/3 of the requirements actually contribute to half of the nutritional requirements. So one meal makes half the nutritional requirements. This shows that these meals have high nutritional value. So the graph that is presented just below, so here we can see that this is adjusted for 2,000 kilocalories, so it's not the 700 I presented, that's why the scale's a little bit different. But what we can see is that even in the canteens where only 4 criteria were complied with, we have achieved 92% of the nutritional score. And so the more the different frequencies of service were complied with, the more we improved the criteria, nutritional criteria for the children. So we can see that the meals are of very good nutritional quality within school canteens in France. Except now comes another question. What about the access to these very good meals? And we had a few alarm bells ringing, which have been around for a while, but these are only qualitative because it's often testimonies from parents' associations who say that there are children who come to school hungry. So there was a report where it is recalled that meals served at the school canteen might be the only high nutritional quality meal that the child has if they come from a very underprivileged family. This report recalls that the overall level of poverty is 14% in France in 2015, and there's an increase in the share of the poorest part of the population. So they underlined the essential role of school meals. Unfortunately, there was no data that was explained, but it did underline the fact that access to the canteen is compromised by a territorial fracture, and so the inequalities between local authorities are accentuated by budgetary restrictions, and which contribute to reinforcing social inequalities and access to the school canteen. So according to this report that underlines the difficulty of having information on this subject, shows that access to the school canteen is partial, because for the first degree, be it the end of primary school or the middle of primary school, almost 100% do go to the school canteen, but only 70% actually, only 50% go every day. So more than 80% in the western sectors of children actually regularly go to the school canteen, whereas in the east of France, for example, under 50% regularly go to the school canteen. And if we look in middle school and high school, we know that about 70% of the pupils are registered for the school canteen in 2017. But once again, we have the problem of regional disparities, which can be acute, with some places where more than 90% of the children go to the school canteen, places where it's less than 60% in the Paris area, for example, and then in overseas territories it drops below 40%. So therefore the meals are of very good quality, but they're not accessible by a part of this population. And this is even the more severe because this other graph shows us what part of the population does not have access to these good quality meals. So there are two cross aspects here. First of all, it's the type of middle school and high school, in particular with all of the high schools in priority educational zones, so underprivileged neighborhoods. Between 56 and 75% of the pupils in these schools are not signed up for the school canteen. And if we look at public schools that are not in these underprivileged areas, it's up to 14% or 30% that do not have access to the canteen. And the gradient you can see is the economic level of the families. And we can see that the underprivileged families, whatever area they live in, or whether they're in private school, public school, or priority zones, they systematically have more chances that they will not go to the school canteen as compared to very privileged children from very privileged families. So once again, there's a problem of inequality, which is territorial and social, of access to this good quality food. So the big problem we have now is that we have no figures that allow us to look at the concrete consequences of the lack of access to school meals. And I would like to take advantage to mention the work that is currently underway on school meals, because I have colleagues in the INRA of Montpellier, in the Moises unit, who are currently working on the questions of changing practices in school canteens to move towards more sustainable practices. And so here they're working with school catering services, parents' associations, and representatives of different territories and municipalities, and researchers who are trying to model what would be the different conditions to guarantee quality of food in mass catering, whilst taking into account the different evolutions, in particular regarding what the GALIM requires and what is demanded by environmental associations on the introduction of vegetarian meals, the reduction of food waste, and the reduction of the environmental impact. So if you're interested, I do encourage you to contact that team. I can give you the contact details afterwards. So the key take-home messages here are, as a nutritionist, it's quite obvious that there are many benefits to school meals. Clearly with regard to the nutritional aspects, but far more because it improves social conditions and the conditions for education. What we see also is that the more frequently we go to the school canteen, the better the nutritional input in terms of frequency in particular, but we have to raise the question of access to school canteens in terms of food environment. In school, the regulation forbids the presence of vending machines for soft drinks and sweet snacks. But the problem of local shops might arise. And what we have to note also is the strong regional disparity and social disparity regarding access to school canteens in France, and the question of food security and possible malnutrition for children from underprivileged families, and also in certain areas. And sometimes there are even combinations between these territories and the level of income of the families. So with regard to the next round table, there are some questions which will be broached in the next round table, but I would like to reiterate these. So the question is, how far can local sectors supply school canteens according to this frequency criteria that we mentioned? According to production in the different territories, maybe it won't necessarily be possible to supply these different foods at the right frequency. So that's not only school canteens, but it concerns mass catering in France as a whole. So, of course, there's the inevitable question of the definition of what is local, especially in certain territories. I'm thinking of the east of France, where if we look at a fruit and vegetable production in quite a broad area, it might be quite tricky to supply all of this mass catering. And there is also the question of the introduction of these local products regarding the economic accessibility of school meals. So according to the prices paid for these products, according to the policy of the municipalities to guarantee low-cost access to school meals for underprivileged children from underprivileged families, if we don't have this type of practice, how far can we aggravate these disparities? And if so, what mechanisms can we develop in order to mitigate the effects? So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Eric. I wanted to ask a question about data or studies to find out more about what happens when children don't go to the school canteen. I had the feeling that the quality of their diet would be less good. So that is the problem, is that we don't really have this data. So I presented the data for France for the NQ2-ENNS survey, which dated back to 2016-2017. There's another survey that was carried out in 2016, but it doesn't necessarily compare meals at home versus school canteen. So there is data that we can still use in order to develop our understanding of the differences between children who do go to the school canteen and children who don't. But we don't necessarily have all of the data within these surveys to know how often the children eat at school, in the school canteen. the economic situation of the families. We have a bit of information, but the problem is that we know in these national surveys we often do not have the information regarding the families that are in most dire economic circumstances. So we need to have this national survey and then a specific survey for underprivileged families. Then we can see the results. But we need to have these two types of surveys in order to identify if there is malnutrition among children who do not go to the school canteens. So we really need to, we have some data that we really need to dig into to see if we can find out more information, and other data that we need to update because we don't have a lot of information. Maybe colleagues will tell me off afterwards and say, oh, no, we do have this, we do have this. But when I looked at this, I really had the impression there was a lack of information to be clear on these effects, because maybe children that don't go to the school canteen might have very good meals provided for them at home. That's quite possible, but the problem is we don't know. But the problem is for those for whom it's not a choice, the kids don't have a choice of going home. The problem is that we have a lot of testimonies and we don't know what weight this represents. So of children who are just outside the school and they're waiting, they don't have a meal. So that's why I was saying we have this concern. We have testimonies that are documented, but in terms of prevalence within the population, we don't really have a clear idea. Two elements to add to this that don't stem from scientific studies but just observation in the field in high schools or in a middle school. Well, middle school and high school. In primary school it's more difficult. As soon as you have a snack bar that opens up next to the school, the number of kids eating at the school canteen really plummets. So obviously the children are attracted by this. The second observation is the nutritional behavior within families, because this behavior is not always very good. For example, when we do work on food waste, one of the first places where food is waste is vegetables and the preparation of vegetables, and this is quite substantial. One of the reasons is not necessarily the ability of the cook to cook the vegetables properly. It's quite simply because people don't eat vegetables at home. So just regarding the geographical issue, the disparity between the regions, what is that related to? Is it linked to the fact that mum might be at home or there is unemployment in the family? Well, that's where the problem lies. And this is a subject that is not particularly my centre of research. I work on school canteens in France and not in other countries. But no, this is not really clearly detailed in the different reports I read to find the information. We don't know if it's related to the fact that it's potentially because there are a lot of men or women at home, or there's a lot of unemployment and therefore children have to go home for lunch, or whether it's simply problems related to infrastructure. There are certain areas that don't have a good distribution of meals in the canteen. So it can be very different factors that explain that the children do not go to the school canteen. So it's not because they don't go to the school canteen that it will necessarily be bad for their health, because it really does depend on the household. But I haven't found any studies that shed light on this. So I think that we need to really explore this question a little bit more to understand. Yes, we must differentiate small kids from big kids. When they're in high school, they just want to eat rubbish. They want to go off and eat in the snack bars and everything in the canteen. Maybe the canteen has to adopt another form. Maybe we need to invent something. In any case, we need to forbid all of the vending machines, etc. Now, vending machines are forbidden already. That's what the gentleman said, but if there's a snack bar that opens up just next to the high school, they'll be over there. just to add to what the lady was saying regarding changing food behaviors, and there's an observation within the scope of a campaign against food wasting. So the same meal in a middle school or in a primary school, in terms of food waste, the primary school, there's practically no food waste. The same meals, the same children, even with a few months interval, because they mimic their elders, waste food. Therefore, it's a very complex situation to unravel. I quite agree. It is multifactorial. There is suppression of peers and mimicking. It's very important in the dietary practices. Shouldn't we also take into account an environmental element that is very important in middle schools and high schools? It's the speed at which the kids have to eat their meals, because their timetables are very complex to put together in high schools and middle schools. And I think that a good quality meal, if it's eaten very, very fast, probably has less nutritive value. So I think that the conditions in which the children eat count. Yes, the conditions are very important. And the data I tried to capture did not allow me to necessarily look at whether we're in a canteen with pre-existing dishes, or was it a self-service system where you could choose what you ate and how much time the children have to eat. All of this is very important, of course, to really sit down, take the time to eat, chew your food properly so that they can draw the full nutritional benefits. But above all, in terms of learning good nutritional habits. Pascal Falco for the city of Marseille. What we have observed, we have a social tariff. For a few children, the meals are free. So children who receive free meals are generally children who don't necessarily live permanently within the territory, and also the Rome community. Then we realized that we had 1,200 free meals given per year, but in fact only 600 free meals were eaten every day. So that was our observation. So we wanted to try to find out what was happening. And in fact, the children who are in very difficult situations, who live in squats or in caravans and camps, they don't come to school every day. So that is one thing. And we also observed that it is not those children who eat everything on their tray. They're children who come, they don't necessarily have enough to eat, but their food is not eaten entirely. So maybe they actually generate more waste on their tray than others.